Hello everyone, and welcome to another Monster Hunter World video. This is Thegameconomist, and today I found myself feeling bored. And no, this is not just another satire video, though I've thought about making another one of those. It was a lot of fun when I was working on those, because it's legitimately time to complain. We know we have Arch-Tempered Zora Magdaros coming. We know after that we're probably getting Arch-Tempered Zenitjiva, and it's safe to bet we're eventually going to hear about Arch-Tempered Nergigante somewhere down the road. We don't know what Capcom has planned after that, so we can speculate about anything you want, like a Roshi Kyurem and a new snow map, or whatever else you may think Capcom is going to be releasing based on previous leaks that have been, so far, fairly accurate. But right now, we don't actually know what's coming down the road, and I feel like that's either a mistake on Capcom's part, meaning I think they aren't capitalizing on the hype players have for this game, or it means there's a long wait before we get any other substantial DLC. Why is that a mistake for Capcom? It's because of the nature of Monster Hunter World. This is not a game you can endlessly grind without getting bored quickly. You know, the multiplayer, which has been poorly designed with a cumbersome and annoying user experience, the multiplayer mode ends up being worse than single player because you're sharing lives and more likely to lose thanks to inexperienced new players. And even when you do win, you end up with less Zenny because someone definitely died, right? Whereas in single player, you're going to earn more and your investigations and Arch-Tempered events are going to, in general, be more successful. Also, we know in the multiplayer, when someone leaves the quest, the difficulty of the match does not get reduced, which is just horrible design that they probably implemented to discourage overzealous hosts from kicking noobs out of a match. Of course, it's either that or they're just bad at designing multiplayer, which is very possible. It's all very confusing why they made the design decisions that they did for multiplayer, and as somebody who has officially put in 1,700 hours, 1,700 hours, I can say that I barely even touch multiplayer anymore. Right, like, the only time I play multiplayer now is when I'm forced to fight one of the worst RNG experiences I've ever had since Destiny, and of course, I'm speaking about Kulve-Taroth, the monster that you will waste a lot of time on if you strictly try to solo, yet even in the case of Kulve-Taroth, once you have her around Pursuit 3, or definitely Pursuit 4, you shouldn't even bother with multiplayer in that case because you can just be in a session and solo her from that Pursuit level for a more consistent win. So even in the case of Kulve-Taroth, where Capcom is really trying to force you to have a multiplayer experience, you're better off soloing her so that you can break her horns consistently from Pursuit 4. So, and again, that's not totally soloing her, you are in the session, but I just mean like, once you're in the session, get her to Pursuit 3 or 4, however you want to do that, and then just solo her at that point, but stay in the session, right? So Monster Hunter World really doesn't offer the social experience that most modern games offer, and this includes things like end-of-game scoreboards, trading with other players, and even PvP, which would be amazing if they could find some way to put PvP in a Monster Hunter World. I know some of you guys are already freaking out because I said that, but I really believe that. I think most games improve once you have PvP, right? Like, think about Pokemon, right? Pokemon, can you imagine Pokemon if you removed PvP from Pokemon? It would still be a fun game, especially if you're still a kid and enjoying Pokemon, but the fact that it had PvP is part of what made it more of a hardcore game, right? So really all we have is the arena right now for Monster Hunter World, which means they did try to add some kind of PvP, but the arena removes all of the aspects of the game that allow you to consider theory crafting for optimal builds. Arena just says, here, take this terrible armor and this terrible weapon and try to have a faster time than anyone else, which it's not wrong of them to have that game mode in World, it's just that it kind of gets boring really fast. Like, they could have had so many other game modes in Monster Hunter World, but the content is truly trickling out of their studio, and that's probably because they were serious when they said they didn't want their game to be a service. Yet here we are with the seasonal events. So it's kind of like a game with bad service, right? It's not a true traditional game, but it's not a good games as a service game, right? You get just enough crumbs from Capcom to think that you need to be on top of the ball and ready for the next big thing, like when they first released Kulve-Taroth or when they first added Deviljho. But ever since we got those monsters, the game has really gone downhill fast. Like, think about it. We got Deviljho, and then we got Kulve-Taroth, which has been a disaster in my opinion. Kulve-Taroth is like Destiny, but with poorer graphics and virtually no story. And then we got Lunastra. She's a Teostra clone, who's also one of the least fun monsters to fight. And finally Behemoth, who was extremely fun until they released the Extreme version. By the time Extreme Behemoth came out, he was already boring and pointless. If you guys were like me, I know you all unlocked the Dragon Armor and the Trugebolg, and then wondered, now what? I get to use Dragon Armor against the same 5 Elder Dragons. Awesome. And my speedrun times, I'm going to shave a minute or two off of my speedrun times, which legitimately I thought as a monster, Behemoth was pretty well done, and my only major complaint was that he didn't offer more rewards, like when Extreme Behemoth came out and he's the most difficult monster in the game, but all you get is layered dragon armor from the event. No thanks. Layered armor in Monster Hunter World tends to only get me confused about the functionality of my build, since I can't visually see what I'm working on with my character, and at this point I'm completely used to not having any decent layered armors, and instead I've accepted that my character is going to look remarkably ugly, because of the way Monster Hunter World has been super stingy with armor as a form of player identity. And maybe that's the way they wanted their game. Or maybe Capcom is just bad at replayability, bad at multiplayer, and bad at armor as a part of player identity and player fashion. But that also means we need new content and new rewards to keep us interested, or we need to know when the game is no longer being supported, so that we can move on to another game when we're feeling bored, which of course, you could have moved on to a new game at any point, there's nothing holding us back, but especially for hardcore gamers, there's a certain level of mental investment you do with the video game so that you can perform like a top player, and so jumping quickly between games isn't quite as satisfying because it generally means you're just going to be average at a few games rather than extremely good at one game that you play every day for 6 to 8 hours. So it's valuable knowing whether or not you should hold on for the next DLC, or whether you should pack your bags, sell your game, and move on to your next large investment of time, and that's the way I've always played video games. Anyways, I said in the title that Arch-Tempered Monsters in Monster Hunter World were wrong, and that means I should deliver on that issue and not just ramble off into every little detail of what could have been, what Capcom could have or should have done. Hindsight is easy, so I just want to start off by saying overall I've been very satisfied with the game and hope Capcom does keep up the good work and continues to release quality video games. And back when Capcom revealed that they would be releasing Arch-Tempered versions of the Elder Dragons, I had two immediate reactions. The first reaction was having to type Arch-Tempered for every single YouTube video and in every single YouTube video keywords was going to be super annoying. The second reaction was that I was very excited to see exactly what they were going to do with the Arch-Tempered versions, because I remember Tempered Elder Dragons really weren't that difficult after the initial shock of playing high rank for the first time. In fact, around the time you learn that Monster Hunter World strongly favors high damage builds, it's about at that point that you also learn that Monster Hunter World is not that difficult. And it's true. Have any of you not used cluster bombs at this point? You'll go from struggling through 20-minute matches, if you're a newer player, 20-minute matches, to watching the news while you mindlessly sweep through 90% of all the monsters in the game with cluster bombs. Don't believe me? Ariana defeated Extreme Behemoth by himself in just 15 minutes using cluster bombs, and that's using the old Zenigeva armor. We're getting new Gamma Zenigeva armor, which will actually make cluster bombs even stronger, not by much, but it will be a net increase to one of the strongest and easiest methods of fighting in the game. So yeah, back when I heard Capcom talk about Arch-Tempered Elder Dragons, I was really intrigued by the concept and hoping that they would bring a level of difficulty and complexity to the game that left me feeling the sort of deep satisfaction that really only a few games have really given me, including the first Destiny game around the time the Vault of Glass came out. But even Borderlands 2 had some great experiences with difficulty, and maybe a little bit of Dark Souls, even though Dark Souls is just mechanically very different from Monster Hunter World, so I try not to compare them, even if they do look like similar games. Right, like Borderlands and Monster Hunter World generally have more in common because you're working down a giant bullet sponge monster and just trying to outlast the bullet sponge before you're overwhelmed. Except in Borderlands, there was usually a very cool weapon or piece of gear you were endlessly grinding after. In Monster Hunter World, the rewards have just been lackluster since the beginning of the game. You never know exactly what you're supposed to be pursuing because within each of the weapon classes, you have like 20 clones of the exact same weapon, except with small attributes that you have to just have knowledge about so that you can run a calculation on them and know which weapon is the strongest. And spoilers, it's rarely the best looking weapon in the weapon class, right? I mean, that's annoying. That's part of the problem. Why did Capcom make that decision? Who knows? Why is Dai Onigashima one of the coolest looking light bowguns in the game, but also one of the worst light bowguns in the game, but also rarity 8? We don't know. There are a lot of things Capcom did that don't make sense. Anyways, I keep rambling. So eventually the Arch-Tempered monsters start coming out. And even though as a YouTuber I recognized that there was going to be potential for content creation around those Arch-Tempered monsters, in my gut I knew right away that we were looking at essentially filler content from Capcom. In other words, once I started fighting the Arch-Tempered monsters, I was immediately disappointed. They have slight modifications over the regular tempered versions, just little things like having to fight them in a different location on the map, or one of their attacks has been, has a larger hitbox, or they have a new attack. It just is barely any different of an attack, right? The biggest change, of course, was that their damage was now doubled, and they have like twice as much health. Those were the most obvious changes to the Tempered Elder Dragons, that you've gone from fighting a bullet sponge to fighting SpongeBob SquarePants, and no, that's not fun. That's what a lot of people have been waking up about and recognizing as artificial difficulty. What is artificial difficulty? Simply put, it's just the developers being lazy with the design of the difficulty in their games. I mean, what's to stop Capcom from releasing all of their Arch-Tempered Elder Dragons again as Extreme Arch-Tempered Elder Dragons? And first of all, let me state that this would be terrible for us YouTubers, because then we would have to type some really ridiculous keywords. But again, what would stop them from releasing Extreme Arch-Tempered Elder Dragons with 4 times as much health and 4 times as much damage? Did they actually release new content? Well, maybe we'll get Omega armor sets that include minute changes to the armor meta, like an extra small decoration slot, or 3 levels of evade window rather than 2 levels of evade window. See the problem here? This is why people are rightfully calling the Arch-Tempered Elder Dragons as padding, which means prolonging the replayability, but with unsubstantial content that is really just there to keep you around in the friend zone as a backup boyfriend in case anything goes wrong. Look at Arch-Tempered Lunastra. Arch-Tempered Lunastra is just Tempered Lunastra, with more damage and a new bad armor set. And Lunastra is just a Teostra clone with an annoying moveset. She could have been included in the base game because all you needed to do to create Lunastra is edit the Teostra moveset, paint Teostra blue, and then give him a haircut, and you've essentially added a monster to the game. And for all we know, she might have actually been in the original base game, and they might have cut her out so that they could release her later as, quote, free content. So we're talking about possibly 3 levels of content padding here, which is just too much, It becomes painfully obvious what they're doing, and if it wasn't obvious to you then it is now because I've pointed it out. So now you might be asking yourself, what is Capcom supposed to do? Should they have just skipped releasing any of the Arch-Tempered monsters to focus more on substantial DLC? First of all, I want to say that I think the game was popular enough that they could have sold high-quality paid DLC. If their game is not like a service, which is their claim, then it's okay to just give us everything that was meant to be in the base game from the beginning, right? No more rotating content. And then sell us good, high-quality DLC, probably something that included a new map and 3 new monsters, and each monster should include an entirely new set of armor and weapons. I would pay $25 for that. Right now, I've paid nothing, $0, to have Gamma armor, many boring hours with the Arch-Tempered monsters, a few like cross-event, promotional stuff for other games, and boring seasonal events, which I'm just waiting for those to end so that I can get back to earning gold Wyverian prints, which, let's be honest, those are like the most important thing you could earn in a week. So don't get me wrong, I think those things could remain in the game if Capcom really wanted to throw around tons of content, but the high quality paid DLC should have been priority, and this other stuff should have been exactly what it is, fluff. The last thing I want to talk about is monetization. Let's say the high quality paid DLC would split the player base and Capcom doesn't want that. Then I actually believe they need to start selling more microtransaction products. Now hear me out. I'm not saying that they should turn the game into a pay-to-win game, or that they should take half the content, hide it behind microtransaction, and then also force us to pay for DLC like Destiny did. That's what Bungie did. But if they released new Palico armors, new handler outfits, more emotes, cosmetic things that the player might pay for just for fun and to support the developer, then I don't see any problems with that, especially if it means everybody could have the high quality DLC for free. Some of my favorite games used this strategy, and I believe it worked out pretty well for them, including Smite. This is a game I still play. It's a full free-to-play game, as well as Mass Effect 3 and Dragon Age Inquisition, though Dragon Age Inquisition, I was kind of losing interest in that game. Those are just to name a few. I think a greater problem for Capcom right now, a greater problem than being perceived as selling too many microtransactions maybe, the greater problem is that there's obvious content padding and there's an obvious content drought, and the lack of a clear schedule on the product life for Monster Hunter World, which has been a pretty high quality game in most aspects, but really we could use some improvements in other aspects like the multiplayer and the replayability, and I do wish Capcom luck on being able to keep their customers happy in the future, but you can just see that there are some problems. Okay, that is everything I had to say about Monster Hunter World. I do think the way Capcom handled the fluff content, including the arch-tempered monsters, was overall a bad decision. We can tell at this point, right? It's easy to tell in hindsight. And we'll see what the future holds. Hopefully some new monsters made out of brand new assets, as well as some new maps. Everybody keeps saying they want an ice map. I think also a water map would be interesting. I mean, if we do get new ice monsters, then really that just leaves water monsters, which we've just had no interesting water monsters, or at least they need to be buffed, or we need arch-tempered versions, or maybe we'll get G rank, I don't know. Alright, I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.